A 19th-century Apache woman committed adultery. Her husband found out. He cut off her nose. No trial, no process, no possibility of appeal. And that wasn't the most surprising part of the system. The most surprising part was what happened when it was the man who committed the infidelity. Because the unfaithful man didn't have anything cut off, what happened to him was completely different, slower, without blood. But according to the direct testimonies of the Apache themselves, recorded by anthropologist Maurice Opler in the 1930s, potentially more devastating to his entire life than any physical consequence. Today, you're going to see the complete system, both sides, why each one existed, and why the same code that contained something so harsh for women also gave them powers that no American woman of the 19th century had. By the end of this video, you'll understand why military officer John C. Cremeny, who lived among the Apache around 1862 and documented his observations in his 1868 work, wrote that the chastity of Apache women was the highest he had observed in all his experience in the Southwest, and why that statement, read today with the full context, was not exactly a compliment. To understand what happened to the unfaithful man, you first have to see how Apache marriage worked, because it was radically different from anything that existed in the 19th century. Apache marriage was matrilocal. When an Apache man married, he was the one who went to live with his wife's family, not the other way around. Maurice Opler, in an Apache Lifeway published in 1941, recorded the direct testimony of a Chiricahua informant. "We do this because a woman is worth more than a man. We do it to accommodate the woman. The son-in-law is almost a slave to them." Almost a slave. Those are the words of an Apache describing his own system. What that meant in concrete terms, the Apache woman never left her territory. The territory had always been hers. Her children belonged to her clan, not her husband's. Her extended family lived there. Her support networks were there. When the marriage ended for any reason, it was the man who left. And Apache divorce was possibly the fastest and most unilateral that existed in the 19th century. The Apache family portal, based on primary historical sources, documents it with precision. If the woman wanted to end the marriage, all she had to do was place the husband's belongings outside the home under a tree. That was the entire process. No mediation, no negotiation, nothing. Now imagine what that meant for an unfaithful man whose wife decided to exercise that right. He lost access to his children, who belonged to the maternal clan. He lost the territory where he had built his adult life. He lost the network of his wife's extended family, on whom he depended for hunting, for protection, for the daily structure of his existence. He lost his reputation within the only clan where he had lived as an adult. All of it in a single day. No process, no appeal. The matrilocal system meant that the unfaithful man lost absolutely everything, because everything he had as an adult was built on the foundation of his wife's territory and family. And now comes the piece that inverts the picture you just built. Because if the unfaithful man lost all of that in a structural and social way, the consequence for the unfaithful woman was of a completely different nature. It was immediate, it was physical, it was visible. H. Henrietta Stockel, a researcher who spent more than a decade working directly with Chiricahua women and published Chiricahua Apache Women and Children, Safekeepers of the Heritage in 2000, records it without softening in her analysis documented in Project Muse. Women were subject to physical abuse, including the cutting of the nose if they committed adultery. Men were not punished in the same way for similar infidelity. The practice has a historical name, rhinotomy. Wikipedia documents it as amputation of the nasal septum, known across multiple ancient cultures as punishment for female adultery. From ancient India to the Roman Empire and the medieval Arab world. Among the Chiricahua Apache of the 19th century, it appears in the records as a possible consequence carried out directly by the betrayed husband. No prior trial, no verification process, no council of elders to review the facts. The immediacy was part of the system. Here is something the textbooks rarely articulate. That same immediacy made the system profoundly vulnerable to error. A husband who acted on the belief of an infidelity that hadn't occurred had no corrective mechanism in that moment. The woman's family, who lived in the same camp, could intervene after the fact. The clan could apply social pressure, but in the instant, the system left judgment in the hands of a single man. Cremony, who observed and documented specific cases in life among the Apaches in 1868, recognized exactly this. The system was effective as a deterrent, but deeply vulnerable to individual error. Hold on to that contrast between the two consequences, because now comes something that radically changes how you read everything above. A number. A piece of data documented directly by Cremony that no one mentions when discussing this Apache code. Over nearly 2 years, with hundreds of Apache under the direct supervision of the Army and in frequent contact with American soldiers, Cremony documented in his 1868 work that he could not record a single case in which an Apache woman had yielded to the advances of a man outside her tribe. Not one. In 2 years, with hundreds of women, under conditions of constant contact with men outside their culture. The booky summary of Chapter 21 of Life Among the Apaches is direct. Among the Apache, a very strong emphasis on female chastity was observed, with cases of infidelity being exceptionally rare. Apache women took pride in guarding their purity with a delicacy that Cremony compared favorably to that of any other culture he had observed. The pride was real. But the question Cremony never explicitly asked, and that the historical record cannot fully resolve, is this: how much of that number was genuine cultural pride, and how much was the predictable result of a system where the consequence for non-compliance was physical, permanent, and immediate? Researcher Deborah Rode, in her historical analysis of adultery laws published by Harvard University Press, documents that across highly diverse cultures throughout history, systems that punished women more severely than men for the same conduct always reflected a view where the woman was the husband's property, not a person with independent rights. The Apache system fit that general pattern, but with a difference that distinguished it from almost everything else that existed in the 19th century. That difference lies in the economic logic behind the complete system. The Apache band of the 19th century was a community of between 50 and 200 people, nomads, always on the move, under constant survival conditions, the Mexican army from the south, the American army from the north, the desert in every direction. In that context, infidelity was not simply an emotional betrayal between two people. It was a fracture in the cohesion of the group. Desert USA, citing Opla's testimonies, documents what prospective husbands valued in a woman: her reputation for hard work, her physical strength, her good temperament. The reputation for chastity was an inseparable part of that social value. But the logic ran in both directions. A man whose conduct generated internal conflict within the clan was equally a risk the group could not afford. In a band of 200 people who needed to move together, hunt together, defend themselves together, internal disintegration from marital conflict could be literally fatal. That's why the system built consequences that operated from two different angles. For the woman, a physical and immediate consequence that functioned as a visible public signal. For the man, the structural loss of everything he had built through a mechanism of unilateral divorce that the woman controlled completely. Two forms of consequence, two distinct logics, one single objective: keep the group together at any cost. This is the system the books don't tell you about when they talk about the Apache of the 19th century, a son-in-law who was almost a slave to his wife's family, a woman who could end the marriage by placing the husband's belongings under a tree, children who belonged to the maternal clan, not the father's, territory that always belonged to the woman, and a consequence for female infidelity without trial, without process, without appeal. All of it coexisted within the same system, and it's impossible to understand one part without the others. Maurice Opler documented it in the field in the 1930s. John C. Cremeny observed it in the field in the 1860s. H. Henrietta Stockel recorded it from the mouths of the last direct descendants in the 1990s. It is not a beautiful system. It is not a simple system. It doesn't fit into any comfortable narrative, neither the one that romanticizes the Apache as a perfectly egalitarian society, nor the one that reduces them to lawless savages. It was a system built by people who faced extreme survival conditions and who designed rules that reflected exactly that, keeping the group together when everything around them was trying to destroy them. That was the code of the Apache clan, and that's how they survived. If this video opened up something you didn't expect to find, there are more stories like this waiting for you here. Cultures that history simplified, systems that deserve to be understood in their entirety. The next story is already here.